Buckle up because this is probably going to be a long one.
This video is not sponsored by any of the companies mentioned.
Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artist at Play, and today I am going to be testing out a shit ton of blending agents on colored pencil. I have been looking for a very long time for great ways to blend colored pencils. I've been working with colored pencils since 2014, and yeah, I usually use Gamsol odorless mineral spirits, but I've been wanting to find alternatives that are safer, and I'll get more into that later. But I thought that it would be good to do a video to help you all out when it comes to making a decision on how you would like to blend your colored pencil work. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I have made a chart here with 6 of my most used colored pencils. One of them is actually a wax pastel. These are the Caran d'Ache Neocolor ones. I use those with my colored pencil work. They're chunkier and they're just like a crayon. The rest are colored pencils. I have the Derwent Lightfast, Luminance, Prismacolor, Polychromos, Holbein, and then, as I mentioned, the Neocolor one. I have swatched these out and I've made it so it's lighter down here with more pressure and more layers up here, because typically speaking, when blending colored pencil, you want to have a lot of layers, although some blending agents blend things more easily than others, and so it'll be good to see if there are some that can blend with the lighter layers. Today I will be testing out blending pencils, which are essentially colorless pencils. They are a colored pencil but without the color, so it's the same kind of core as a colored pencil, but it doesn't have the color in it, so you can blend with that. I have 2 different kinds here. I have the Prismacolor Premier, and then I also have the Caran d'Ache. And another kind that I have used in the past that I really liked was the Polycolor by Koh-i Noor. Those work fairly well as well. And then I also have a blending marker. So let's take a look at what a blending marker is. This is a Prismacolor Premier blending marker, and what this is it's actually an alcohol marker with no color. So again, it's just a colorless blender. You can use these with your alcohol markers to lift and to create different effects and to blend with your alcohol markers, but they also work with colored pencil. And there are other brands out there that also make these. Pretty much any alcohol marker brand that makes a colorless blender, it should work. I like the Prismacolor Premier. They also offer this in a chisel nib, but I'm always somebody who wants to go for the brush nib. They used to sell a 2-pack of them. I'm not sure if they still do. And there are some markers out there that are advertised specifically as a colored pencil blending marker, and that's essentially the same thing. The next thing that I want to test is rubbing alcohol. This is something that most of us have in our household. It's fairly inexpensive, and if you were on a budget, it might be a good alternative if it ends up working well in the tests. And of course, Q-tips. So this is for those who are on a budget. Obviously, this is not necessarily made for art. It's a household item. However, it can be used for different effects in art. The next thing that I'm going to show you is the odorless mineral spirits. Now this is the big enchilada right here, folks. This is what a lot of colored pencil artists use. And Gamblin is my favorite, the Gamsol. And as you can tell, it's very large because I go through a lot of it. This is something that can also be used to thin your oil paints. So it's not just for colored pencil, but it is also made to thin your oil paints and clean brushes and things like that. Now, the thing about this, once you start getting into solvents, you do have to worry about them being a little bit caustic. You have to worry about fumes, cleanup, and things like that. So let's take a look at the warnings on here. Now, something I want to note, odorless is always the best way to go when you're going with something like this, as opposed to something like turpentine and things like that. However, just because something is odorless does not mean that it is not putting out harmful fumes In fact, it makes it harder to detect the harmful fumes that you are breathing in when it's odorless. And so that's something to keep in mind. If you're using something like this, you have to have proper ventilation. You don't want open containers of it in your studio for long periods of time, things like that. And this is safer. It's a safer alternative to regular turpentine, but it does not make it 100% safe. So this is one reason why I'm doing this video and trying to find things that are a little bit safer, because I'm going to be an artist my whole life. I'm going to be around these things my whole life. So just for safety reasons, I have been trying to find something that is a little bit safer that can do the job of gambling, because this is the one to beat, folks. So I think that Mona Lisa, there's a Mona Lisa brand that I hear is very similar as well. So let's just read the warnings. Danger, combustible, harmful or fatal if swallowed. Vapor, harmful. So even though it's odorless, it's putting out harmful vapor. It contains petroleum distillates, and that's where you're going to get that harmful vapor. Precautions, avoid ingestion. Obviously, don't eat any of the things in this video, please. Do not store or use near heat or flame because it is combustible, so flammable. Only use with adequate ventilation. Keep out of reach of children. And then it goes into the first aid and things like that. So that's just giving you an idea of what we're dealing with here. This is quite poisonous if not used properly, or even if you're not just having proper ventilation and things like that. So the next thing is Lavender Spike Oil. This has been recommended to me numerous times when I've mentioned that I want an alternative to odorless mineral spirits. So this is touting itself as a safer natural solvent for oil painting, but it can also be used to blend colored pencil. No carcinogenic fumes, no petroleum, and no turpentine. So it's not supposed to be giving off these vapors that could be poisoning you like this is. Now let's take a look, because there are some warnings. May be harmful if swallowed. Eye irritant, contains spike oil of lavender. Precautionary, avoid ingestion, keep away from eyes, keep out of reach of children. So definitely more mild of a warning than this, and obviously it has the seal here like saying that like we're going to tell you anything that's wrong with it. Now, this does have an odor to it. It smells like lavender. If you're somebody who doesn't mind odors, that's something that, you know, some people think it's soothing and they look at it as an essential oil, you know, so they think it's nice and relaxing and things like that. But those of us who are sensitive to odors, that's something to keep in mind. Something else that I found about the Lavender Spike Oil. It evaporates at a similar rate to turpentine, but its distinctive lavender scent does not cause acute and chronic health problems, such as those associated with the inhalation of toxic fumes from turpentine or petroleum mineral spirits. So, safer to breathe in even though it smells. The next thing on my list is the Holbein Meltz. Now this one is unique because it is an aqueous solution. So some of these are oils and things like that. This is actually water-based, which gives it some unique working properties, which we'll get into later. It is made by Holbein. And it also has the seal of approval saying that if there is anything poisonous in this bottle, it is going to tell you. So let's read. After use, close cap tightly, keep out of reach of children. Please clean your brushes after each use with Meltz. In case of contact with eyes and or skin, rinse immediately with plenty of water. Seek immediate medical attention in case of accidental indigestion. So like all the rest of them, you don't eat them. But there are no warnings on here about any type of caustic fumes or anything like that. And it does state explicitly that it may not work with all other brands of colored pencil. So that's something to know. And depending on the type of paper, it may stain the opposite side. And I am going to do a little test, like a stain test too. And I'll get into that in a little while. So that's the Meltz. Very few warnings. The only thing is it may not work with everything. And then the next one has been recommended highly, And this is the Zest-it pencil blend, and it's citrus free. So this one doesn't have an odor, which is something that I was really looking forward to. A non-flammable, non-toxic, citrus-free solvent for blending colored pencils. So this one, unlike these, they recommend only using this one for colored pencils, whereas these can also be used as oil paint. However, for oil paint, I should say. However, Zest-it also makes oil painting solvents. And so I think that's actually where they started, and then they got into the pencil blend, if I remember right. The thing about this is that it is harder to come by in the United States. I got this from Jackson's, I believe, and I had to have it shipped over from Jackson's Art Supply. But it is not as easy to find in the United States, so that is a bit of a con here. And then, warning, may be harmful if swallowed and enters airways. If not, if swallowed, do not induce vomiting, get immediate medical attention. Repeated exposure may cause skin dryness. Wash hands after use. If eye contact, rinse with plenty of water. Keep away from children, and contains aliphatic hydrocarbon. Basically, just with the rest, do not eat it. And then the last thing that I have here is just your regular old blending stumps, just a paper tortillon, and I will show you that last because it's really, I don't have high hopes for it. Okay, so I have a pro-con list here for myself. It's not very pretty, but I am going to add some pros and cons as I'm blending. I also have a side note, and that is Inktense, which is a water-based pencil. And I want to show you something interesting about how solvents don't typically blend out water-soluble items, like Inktense, watercolor pencils, things like that. However, since we do have a water-based one in our midst, I just kind of want to try it out, and I want to see if any of them smear, because if you are working mixed media, you may not want everything to blend all at once. So I am going to try the other solvents on a water-based pencil, and that would be the Inktense. Also, something that I want to note, I am working on Arches Hot Press watercolor paper. It is 140, not their heaviest, but this is what I usually use for colored pencil. Another paper that I work on that is lighter is the Canson Me Tints. This is a tinted paper, and this is about 90, I think, maybe like 88. It's a lighter weight, and it shouldn't change much as far as the blending goes. However, the staining aspect, whereas it might seep through the back, that may change with the weight of the paper. And so I'm going to put little drops on these as I go, and then we're going to check a little bit later and see if it seeped through the paper and if it's stained once dry. Okay, so let's get started. I have my pencils here, and as I explained before, it's basically just a colored pencil with no color in it. And I have two different brands here. I have the Prismacolor Premier and I have the Caran d'Ache, which both tend to be on the fairly soft side, I believe. So I want to test kind of top and bottom of each of these. So if I start with the Prismacolor, and I'm going to just kind of go across the top of each of these. The thing about these is you can really get into the grooves of the paper, and you're just kind of smearing those around. Now, Derwent Lightfast, which is the pencil that we are blending right now, tends to be a pencil that blends really easily. It is considered an oil-based pencil, but it really feels a lot more on the waxy side. And so, as you can see here, I'm just using small circular strokes, and I am blending that out. Now, the first thing to note is, while it does blend really well, it is filling the tooth of that paper. It's burnishing. It is smoothing it out. Now, you can also do this with the colored pencils themselves. If you just keep working with your colored pencils, they will naturally blend out together, and then you may not have that issue. Other people also like to come over it with a white pencil, but a white pencil will lighten everything and make it more milky. Now, this does tend to lighten things just slightly, but not as bad as a white pencil. But that is something to note. Look how much lighter this is than this is now that I've blended that out with this, because while it is technically clear, it still kind of has a milkiness to it. And so it is making it so that it is lightening that tone there. So now let's go and try it on the luminance. Now, just because this is a Prismacolor does not mean it cannot be used on other brands. They are all wax and oil based, all these pencils. And so it's just a matter of how much wax and how much oil, and it can definitely be used, whereas Prismacolor is a softer brand to begin with and easier to blend as a pencil to begin with. That's why I really love this one, because it helps blend them out, and I've never had an issue with other companies. Now I'm coming on to my Luminance pencil. Luminance are considered more of a wax-based. Again, like I mentioned, all these pencils have wax and oil. It's just some lean more towards the waxy side. Waxy pencils tend to blend out more easily than oil-based pencils. Oil-based pencils tend to hold a sharper point and get finer detail. So my Luminance is a wax-based. I have no trouble blending that out with this pencil. Again, you're seeing this is lightening it a little bit. Now, going Prismacolor on Prismacolor. Again, Prismacolor is also a wax-based pencil. They are known for being buttery smooth. I didn't even have to put as many layers down on my Prismacolor. This whole area doesn't have a lot of layer on it compared to my Luminance, and it is still blending out. On to Faber-Castell Polychromos. This is probably the most oiliest oil-based pencil here. And so it is going to be a little bit harder of a lead and may not blend out as easily. That being said, when you come over it and you do those small circles with a sharp point, you are still able to blend these out. Now onto the Holbein. Holbein is a wax, oil, and fat hybrid. It's kind of got its own formulation to it. They usually blend out very buttery smooth. And again, we're coming in small circular strokes. I'm rotating my pencil as I go, which is a tip for any colored pencil that you're using, so that I don't have to sharpen as often. So once this little side dulls down, I'm rotating and I'm making it so that I have the other side, which is still sharp, and that way there it is wearing the pencil more evenly. And you can really see where it lightened that one up. Now we're going to go on to the Neocolor one. Now the Neocolor one is a wax pastel. It's a crayon. So just for reference, this is what it looks like. Very similar to what you would expect out of a crayon. Does not have the sharpest point. And so it makes it a little harder to get into the grooves of that paper. So it is a wax-based medium, obviously. So it's going to be easy to blend in the aspect that the pigment itself, the wax itself, is going to be pushed around really easily on the paper. However, the fact that it doesn't get into the grooves of the paper can cause challenges. As opposed to, you look at our regular pencils, we have our Luminance, our Holbein, our Polychromos. Oh, that's a second Polychromos. I don't know how that got in there. Our Derwent Lightfast and our Prismacolor. These kind of have different thicknesses, some of them. I mean, you always got your Derwents a little bit thicker. That being said, all of these are going to get into the groove of the paper much easier than this. However, that being said, because there is so much pigment laid down all at once, what starts out looking kind of staticky ends up blending out beautifully because there's just so much payout from a very little amount. And so these are very quick to work with, great for backgrounds and things like that. I've heard them likened to a big fat thick Prismacolor because they blend out so easily. Okay, so now we're going to go in with our Caran d'Ache and just see if there's any difference between this pencil blender and our Prismacolor blender. These all generally are very similar. And I apologize that there's a shadow from my hand. I'm working with natural lighting today, and you know, there's only so much I can do. Now, so far, this already feels a little bit waxier to me. And it seems to be leaving a little bit more streaks. It's kind of running over the top of it. Does not seem to blend out as well as the Prismacolor in the spots where there's less pigment. Kind of feels slippery to me, like it's not quite gripping onto the pigment below and moving it around, kind of like it's sliding over it. Is it working? Yes, it is blending. It just doesn't seem to be blending as well as the Prismacolor one, which does not surprise me. As I said, the Prismacolor definitely tends to really blend things out because it's just such a waxy, like, pencil. I am noticing, though, that it doesn't, because it hasn't spread out as much, it still seems to be a little bit darker than the top. Definitely streakier, though. You can really see the difference there. Does not seem to work with Holbein very well, which is very interesting to me because, and you'll see in the future, Holbein and Caran d'Ache seem to be at odds with certain things. And I'm not saying that as companies in general, I'm saying the working properties of their materials, and you'll see later on why I'm saying that. But that's very interesting to me. It did not want to blend out that Holbein. And of course, I'm coming over a Caran d'Ache item with a Caran d'Ache item that seems to blend out pretty well. Still doesn't seem to be, well, definitely blended out the Neocolor one better than it blended out the rest. So even better than it blended out the Luminance, which is also the same company. But of course, there's a lot more pigment down on the paper. Okay, so now let's get into the blending marker. I have a little piece of paper here because I'm going to need to wipe this off in between. Now, the blending marker basically uses alcohol. You have a nib side that gets into the details a little bit more. And again, you can use this for finer details. I'm starting at the lighter part and I'm pushing towards the darker part because I want to see, does this blend out the lighter parts? And it does. Fairly well. Again, that's on the Derwent Light Fast. You can put the cap here. Now, a downside to this is that they do dry out eventually. And it's kind of a lightweight item, so it's hard to tell when it's drying out until it starts to dry out. And I used these a lot when I first started out in colored pencil. I feel like the brush end tends to be juicier than the nib end. Again, that's not a bad thing. Because you don't want to have too much of a solvent on your brush or, you know, on your nib, because it can actually lift pigment if you do. Didn't seem to like the Holbein as much, but it's done pretty well so far on the others. Now let's see if it does anything to the Neocolor ones. And it does. It does. It blends it. Now, these are definitely convenient. You can put this in your travel bag with your favorite colored pencils and have it on hand. You don't have to worry about having bottles of things or containers to put them in. You just pop it in and you have it, and it's great for on the go. Now let's try the brush side. See, it's nice and soft and flexible, and it's going to cover more area faster, but it may not get into the tooth of the paper the same way. However, if you've got backgrounds and things like that, it may be convenient. Oh, I meant to wipe this off a little bit so it's not carrying from the last one. But you can see here especially how it blended the Prismacolor really well on the top here. And you can see it's a little bit streakier with this brush. And it's going to be streakier in the places where you don't have as much pigment. That's pretty much the rule of thumb with all of this. All right, this one. I don't know why this is so satisfying with these crayons. See, it definitely is having a harder time with the brush end getting into those details. But that is our alcohol-based marker, our colorless blender alcohol-based marker. Okay, so now this one's kind of obscure. This one is going to be rubbing alcohol. Now, I don't have high hopes for this. That being said, I'm just going to pour a little bit into a cap. I'm going to pick some up. I have a rag that I'm going to blot it on so it's not too much, and we're going to see. It does definitely work. Works really well on the light fast. Now, the reason why I don't have high hopes for this is because it may not work on all of them. But that being said, if you're in a pinch, I've heard people recommend things like baby oil or vegetable oil or things like that. Will those blend colored pencils? Yes. Will it yellow your paper over time? Probably. Rubbing alcohol, the way that it evaporates so fast, it's less likely to cause archival issues with your work down the line. It doesn't tend to yellow things. It doesn't tend to crack things over time. Sometimes oils can be a little bit finicky. And so if you are going to use a household item that is not intended for the use in art, I recommend, especially for blending, go with the rubbing alcohol as opposed to any of the oils, because you want it to stand the test of time, and I think the rubbing alcohol will be your best bet. Now, it's going to be one of those that definitely isn't as strong as some of the others that you'll see in the future. And so you're really going to see that in these lighter areas where there's not as much pigment. That being said, for a household item that most of us have laying around in the house that is fairly inexpensive, it does a pretty darn good job. So if you're looking to save money, definitely try it out. After this, I'm going to turn it over and we'll see what the staining is like. Again, this is the Arches hot press watercolor paper, so it may not show through as easily. It's a little bit on the thicker side. It's not the 300, but it's the 140. And it can definitely handle liquid. That's another reason why I like using watercolor paper for my colored pencil pieces, because if you're blending with solvents and things like that, you want something that can handle liquid. Now, let's see. It didn't seem to like the Holbein as much. I'm going to switch. And I've been rotating, so I haven't been using the same side of my Q-tip for each one. I've been rotating it so that way there I'm not carrying pigment over from the previous colored pencil. It is working on the crayons. Not as well, though. It's pushed some of the purple in between the strokes, but you can still see visible strokes. Okay. Now, the other thing about that is it's safer that if it goes down the drain and things like that. Some of these things should not be going down the drain. Don't dump it back into your bottle, though, because if you do use this for other things, I recommend keeping some on hand for the family and some on hand in your art studio. Keep it separate, but obviously you don't want to contaminate it with color. All right, now on to the big boy. We're going to use some odorless mineral spirits. I am just going to be using like a no-name brand Taklon brush, just a synthetic Taklon brush. Normally, I like to put my odorless mineral spirits in a water brush. I have only a hole open here, and I take a pipette and I stick it down in there and I suck some up, and I use gloves because this stuff leaks everywhere. And I put the pipette into my water brush, fill the water brush, and it stays in there. Luckily, it doesn't leak out of the water brush. Stays in there, very convenient. That's how I always use it, typically speaking, because I don't want to have it open in the studio or around my pets or anything like that. So, but today, I'm just going to use a regular brush, and I'll be using this same brush down the line. I'll just clean it off in between. When you wet your brush, you want to kind of dab it on a rag. You don't want to have too much on there. And it melts things down just fine. And this is what I switched to a long time ago because I already had some on hand for thinning oil paints. And this has been one of my favorite products for years and years and years. However, in recent years, I've had some health issues pop up, and it's got me thinking about what I'm using in the studio and my health and safety. I have a little bit more on there than I would like. As you can see, it kind of stains the paper a little. That reminds me, I want to take some of this, just a little, and I'm going to put it on my little swatch card here. Just to show how, and something else already dropped over here, just to show how it shows through, and then we'll let it dry and we'll see. Because this one tends to be highly staining. That's another reason why there's certain tricks that I can do with others, which I'll tell you about in a little while. But this one tends to be higher staining than others of the paper, which is one reason why you really have to have more layers down when you're working with odorless mineral spirits, because it will stain your paper if you don't have enough of the pigment down when you're blending. And odorless mineral spirits pretty much eats through anything. I've never had any issues with brands with these. Again, you're seeing here, it doesn't want to blend out where it's light layers. Some of these, like the blending pencil, works better in the light layers than the odorless mineral spirits does. And that's why I left some light layers down, so you can see the difference there. And no problem here with the Neocolor ones. Okay, now we are going to move on to the Lavender Spike Oil. But first, I want to put a little bit of this alcohol marker down. Oh, and I meant to put some rubbing alcohol too. We'll just put... Alright, now the Lavender Spike Oil. It's beautiful. Now, I am somebody who is not huge on highly scented things, and it's considered an essential oil, and it's supposed to be therapeutic, but to me, it kind of gasses me out. So I love you. I love you all. You must know this, because I bought this stuff because I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it out. I tried it out, and I was like, oh, hell no. Personal preference, though. It's personal preference. Let's see how it blends, though. Whew, she's rugged. She is rugged. Now, right off the bat, I'm seeing that it can definitely stain. Oh, speaking of that. Yeah, I just put a little swatch there to see it stain. Already, though, look at this. The alcohol pretty much disappeared. Alcohol marker disappearing by the moment. This obviously is fresh. The OMS has stayed, and that's the first one that I put on there. And it is seeping through the paper. So that's something to note on the lighter paper. Some of these are going to seep through. Something you want to keep in mind if you're working on a pad of paper or even a watercolor block or something like that where there's paper below, it may seep through to the other side. This isn't as strong smelling as I was remembering, but it's certainly not think that I'll be working with regularly. But it does blend each of these out fairly well. I haven't seemed to have any issues between brands of colored pencil so far, but it doesn't seem to be doing as well as some of the other things. So here we go. Look at this. And you can definitely tell the difference. Like, look, when there's a lot of pigment, it blends out much more easily. These don't have as much pigment down as that. So, again, I know I've said it numerous times. That is something to keep in mind. You want to make sure you have enough layers down. I have left it so there's not as many layers because I want you to see, while it still blends, this is what it's going to look like if you don't have enough layers. But you can definitely see at the end where there's a lot of layers that it does away with the tooth of the paper. Other than the rubbing alcohol over here, didn't seem to want to do much to that. All right, now I'm going to move on to the Meltz. I switched the brush just because this is a water-based medium, so I don't want to mess around with it too much. Now, it seems like witchcraft, really, to have a water-based melting agent for something that's wax-based, but it works. She works. No odor, no fumes. Look how well that blends. Let me move the alcohol, it's casting a shadow. Derwent light fast. Boom. However, and this is what I alluded to before, the Holbein Meltz, she don't like the luminance as much. Which is really funny because the Caran d'Ache pencil blender didn't like the Holbein colored pencils as much. And so I think that's really funny. Like, this is the one pencil that I have struggled to get Holbein Meltz to melt out of my whole collection. So as soon as I saw that their pencil blender didn't want to work on a Holbein, I'm like, wow, they just don't get along, do they? Their formulations just must be so opposite. But Prismacolor, she's back to blending. Ooh, that was a little too much. But look at that. Polychromos, it definitely melted. And you can lift it if you want to. Now, there's something special about the Holbein Meltz. And that is the fact that you can turn your colored pencil basically into watercolor with it. I have a whole video on that. I will link that in the description, and I'll put it on my end page. But it does not touch the Caran d'Ache Neocolors, like barely even touches it. Again, they're not pals. They're not pals in this scenario. And I am cleaning my brush in between things. We'll put a little bit of Meltz on here, probably more than I should have, and we'll come back to it in a little while and see how it dries. But I do want to show you something. Again, I have a video on this. However, if I take a colored pencil, and I'm doing it with a Prismacolor just to show. It doesn't matter if it's Holbein or not. As long as it's not a luminance. As long as it's not a Caran d'Ache, it should work. Color it on something plastic. Lift it up. I can paint on it. I can paint it on like it's watercolor. And because it doesn't stain the same way, as you can see, I mean, I put way too much on that paper, but it doesn't stain the same way OMS does. It works. Let me see, the same one. If I go in with OMS, it dries up too fast, it doesn't spread smoothly, it stains the paper. So that is something that I always will find as a pro for the Meltz, because that opened up a lot of doors for me as far as how I worked with colored pencil. All right, forward and onward. Now we are coming to the Zest-it pencil blend. I should also note I have my windows open and everything else too, so thankfully it's an unseasonably warm day today here in Maine, and so I've been able to keep my windows open and air everything out. Shanna from the future here. I am so sorry about the terrible focus in these couple of clips. It will get better, I promise. I have been wanting to try this for years, but again, it's not easily accessible. It does have a little bit of staining. Oh, that reminds me. That's the amount that I should have put on for the Meltz. Meltz normally doesn't show through the same way. I think I've had a little bit more on my brush than I've meant to the past couple times. It feels very similar to OMS to me, which I like because that's what I'm used to working with. But it doesn't have those fumes, at least not to that degree. It doesn't state anything about fumes. That being said, you wouldn't want to spray or splatter this product because if you get the product itself into your airways, that can cause health issues. Look at that. Now this was something that I really was looking for because I'm working with these more and more, and I wanted something, again, a little goes a long way with that one because I didn't have a ton on my brush and it was still like laying right down. I do feel like there's a slight odor from the Zest-it. Not like an odor, but like almost like an aftertaste. Not taste because I'm not tasting it. I'm putting a new lighter thing of Meltz there to be a little bit more fair. And I feel like something else just dripped on the alcohol marker because that was not that dark. But as you can tell, this is the spot that wasn't there before. I think I put it on top of a different, because I have to wash my table. But the alcohol marker actually didn't show through. Neither did the rubbing alcohol. OMS has dried up considerably. It showed through before. The Lavender Spike Oil is still showing through pretty strong. And of course, I just laid down the Zest-it, so it's a little bit, it's still going to be showing through quite a bit. The alcohol marker, the original spot was right there. This got laid in something. Now, let's take out our blending stump. No other blending agent, just a stump. This is a little grimy, but it'll still do the job. Really nothing. Not really enough. Nope. Hell no. Okay, a little bit. Better than the Meltz did. Okay, I have to apologize. I think things got a little bit blurry when I was doing the last of the blends. So here is a closer look at the chart now that they are all blended out. Let's look at this. You can definitely see Zest-it had a field day. A little goes a long way with Zest-it. I didn't think I had a lot on my brush. Really dry that brush off before you use it, because look how it stained this paper. And again, this is a thicker paper than this one. You can see here, the Zest-it has definitely cleared up a lot more since then. The alcohol marker, again, that little stain there is from something else that I set it on. Over here, you can kind of see the alcohol marker. The OMS finally cleared up. It does evaporate eventually. It just stains at the time and can darken the paper while you're using it. So when I say staining, they don't necessarily stay permanently stained, but it can cause issues when you're working because it'll darken your paper and it may make it seem like the tone is a little bit off or something like that. And it can cause issues when trying to do certain effects. So it's probably been another half hour. And as you can see, the staining has gone way down, and this is on our thinner paper. So even though they do stain during working and it can make things a little bit more difficult, most of them will eventually evaporate and not cause too many issues. Okay, so something else that I wanted to show you is the fact that Inktense is not something that typically is easily blended out with solvents, because Inktense is made to be used with water. So let's take a look at what you can do with Inktense. And Inktense is made by Derwent. It is a water-soluble pencil. It is very vibrant, so it's ink-like in its appearance, but it is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, a watercolor pencil. So this is what it does with regular water. Now, sometimes I like to work with Inktense and come over it with colored pencil. And if I want to blend my colored pencil and I don't want my Inktense to be disturbed below, it's important to know if a certain blending agent is going to disturb Inktense layers. So, let's try Odorless Mineral Spirits. Doesn't really touch it. Thing is I've had to rinse this with water in between, so dry it off as much as possible. So that's the Odorless Mineral Spirits. It does move with an alcohol-based marker. So this is just something to keep in mind if you are somebody who likes to work with mixed media. Moves a little bit with Lavender Spike Oil, but really not bad. I'm going to come in with a fresh brush, though. This one hasn't been used on anything, so it's dry. Yeah, so the Lavender Spike Oil does move it a little bit. Okay, let's try the Zest-it next. Just a little bit, because a little goes a long way with this Zest-it, as we saw on our other swatches. No, it doesn't seem to actually really move the pigment too much. It's staining the paper below. Not really that much of a surprise. Now we're going to use our Meltz. And this is what I wanted to really show you, because Meltz is just so different. Look at this. Even compared to the alcohol marker, which moved it a lot, and even compared to water, because it is a water-based blender. So this puppy, this little guy right here, will blend colored pencil and water-based pencil as well. And if you do this, little bit of Inktense and a little bit of And then if I take that, they're overlapping a little bit. That's a Holbein colored pencil and an Inktense water-soluble pencil. Blends them together like they belong together. Marries them. Like they're soulmates. So that is something to note. You can get a lot of special effects with this Meltz, and you can also do things like splattering effects and things like that, and where there's no harmful vapor in it, you're not worried about breathing in things that you're spraying into the air. It's a little bit safer to do those special effects with. So I just wanted to show you that as a side note. If you want to use mixed media, keep in mind, if you want to do colored pencil over Inktense and you don't want it to move, then you're going to want to use something like Zest-it or OMS so that it's not moving your Inktense layers below. But if you do want to be able to blend Inktense alongside your colored pencils, Meltz is definitely the best way to go, but alcohol marker works as well. So that was kind of a side note, but I wanted to show you that because it's a little bit different, and those of us who like to use both, it's good to know. Let's get to our pro-con list. So for the pencil blender, the blending pencils, the pros are they will blend some of the lighter layers, especially the Prismacolor one. They are convenient for on the go because you can just throw it in with your pencils and you have it with you. You don't have to worry about cleanup or anything like that because it's not wet. It's a nice dry material. You have to sharpen it, which is kind of a con. It needs to be sharpened. So that requires a little bit of maintenance. But other than that, it's very, very convenient. And it's not a health hazard. And they're fairly inexpensive. You can buy them open stock. If you get the Prismacolor one, I feel like it's $1 something right now. Open stock, don't quote me on it. Inflation is inflation. Who knows, that's probably changed. But a couple bucks maybe at most. And yeah, fairly inexpensive. Let's talk about the cons of the pencil. Takes longer. Harder on the hands. You'll get hand cramps after a while, especially if you're doing a whole large piece and that's the only way you're using blending. It will definitely cause some hand cramps. It fills the tooth of the paper and it can lighten the color a little bit. And the Caran d'Ache does not work on the Holbein colored pencils. So just be careful about what brand you go. I would go with like a Prismacolor one because it goes on any one of these brands. It blended out perfectly. You can definitely see the comparison there. Okay, so then the marker, it comes in a variety of nibs, fairly inexpensive. It will blend lighter layers, and so won't the pencil. I think I mentioned that. So even if you don't have as many layers down, it will blend it pretty well compared to some of the solvents. They're lightweight and convenient. You can just put it in your travel pack, put it in with your pencils, and have it on hand at all times. Again, you don't have to worry about separate containers or anything like that. Low staining. The cons for the blending marker is they may dry up. The brush nib is not necessarily as even as the bullet nib, and it can be more time consuming than some of the others. Rubbing alcohol. Convenient because you already have it in your house. It can be blended out with Q-tips or a brush. More archival than trying to use a baby oil or a vegetable oil or something like that. Inexpensive, low staining, and it's definitely faster than using a pencil blender or a marker. It's not as strong or as even of a blend for some of them, although for Derwent Lightfast, it blended it out beautifully. And it has an odor. It smells like rubbing alcohol. So if you have a hard time with the smell of alcohol, it is not something that you may want to work with. All right, odorless mineral spirits. Versatile, can be used for oil painting as well. Works on virtually everything as far as the brands go. It's fast, it blends really well. Cons: stains paper when you're working, health hazard, flammable, needs lots of layers down in order to do it, basically because it's staining the paper. Something else that I meant to mention, if you don't have a lot of layers down, when you use odorless mineral spirits, it can be harder to come on top and layer on top and get rid of that gritty look, because it kind of ingrains that into your paper. So that's another reason why you want to have a lot of layers when you use some of these, because those strokes are going to be much harder to get rid of now that we blended them out already than it would have been had you just like had I gone over it and just layered it and then blended. So coming on top, I can layer on top, and it allows me to because these don't fill the tooth of the paper as much as, say, the blending pencil. However, it's going to be much harder than if I had just come on top with the amount of layers I needed to begin with before blending. Yeah, so the main thing for this is the health hazard. It's just so much more toxic than the other options here. The lavender, no toxic fumes, touted as an aromatherapy for those who like the smell of lavender and aren't bothered by odor. Can also be worked with oil, blends all the different brands, it's fast, and it blends well. For cons, it is expensive. It is highly staining when you're working. It has an odor, and it needs lots of layers, just like the odorless mineral spirits. So the Meltz, this is our little wild card here. It's water-based, which is unlike anything else here. It can turn colored pencil into watercolor, which to me is a pro because I like to work mixed media and I like to do different things with my work. Non-toxic, blends really well. It's also a fast-moving thing as opposed to the pencils and the markers. Low staining, and works pretty well on less layers, you know, for some of the brands. Not as well on luminance, which we're getting to. A con is that it does not work on Caran d'Ache products, at least not the two I have. It doesn't work on luminance, and it does not work on the Neocolor One Wax pastels at all. Like, it was like, no, this is not happening. I haven't tried it on their other colored pencils or anything like that, because I don't own any other colored pencils by them. And then a side note on that is that it also will blend out water-based or watercolor pencils, which is something that could be used to your advantage, but it can be a disadvantage if you're not expecting it. So just be careful if you're working mixed media. Something else that I like about the Meltz is that it's easy cleanup because it is water-based and I don't have to wear gloves when I'm handling it or anything like that. And then Zest-it, no toxic fumes, blends all brands, works very similarly to OMS, virtually scentless, and the cons are that it stains the paper when working. You need lots of layers because it stains the paper. Again, very, very similar to odorless mineral spirits in working properties. This is something that you wouldn't want to do like splatter effects with like you can the Holbein Meltz because it does say that you don't want to get the product itself in the airway. And it's not easy to find in the US. And a big con to both of these is cost. I think this is probably the most expensive. This can be, you can find a smaller bottle of this for fairly inexpensively. And it will, a little goes a long way. It's just that I've been using it for years, so that's why I got the big bottle. But I believe that this is pretty pricey. This is the most expensive. And then this, you have to factor in cost because of shipping and things like that because it's not available in the US. So those are our options. So I have to say, odorless mineral spirits working-wise was always my favorite for many years, but I want a healthier alternative. So the pencil blender, I used that for years as well, but it was harder on the hands. So that was something that I don't use as often anymore. Plus, I don't like the fact that it kind of lightens some of the colors a little bit. The marker became inconvenient for me because they dried up on me at inconvenient times. And so that's another reason why I had switched to odorless mineral spirits from those. However, I still like to keep these and the pencils in my pack when I'm out and about as opposed to something else. Although, it is very convenient. Again, if you use my method and you put one of these in a water brush, it becomes just as convenient. So, what does all this mean? My two favorites now are the Zest-it, because it feels so similar to me. Little goes a long way. I'm going to put that as a side note. Little goes a long way. Very, very similar to odorless mineral spirits, and it will blend out all of the stuff here. But it can be a con because it stains, and so you have to be careful. A little goes a long way. I didn't have a whole lot on my brush, but it felt like I did. Like it acted like I did. So I have to be careful of that. That's something that I'm going to have to learn to control. And it's not as easy to find in the US. But working with it, it feels closest to me to odorless mineral spirits. And the lavender oil feels very similar to odorless mineral spirits as well. But I am not somebody who wants to deal with that smell. I just cannot deal with the scent of this. And the price is it definitely is a turnoff for me. So Zest-it and Meltz are my two favorites. I think I use Meltz quite often now. The only con to the Meltz for me is the fact that it doesn't want to work on Caran d'Ache products. So for pieces that I plan on using my Neocolor ones in and my luminance in, I am going to be using my Zest-it. But for pieces where I want to do fun effects, like watercolor effects and things like that, or if I want to do mixed media and use my Inktense and my colored pencils interchangeably to blend, I will be using the Meltz. And again, as I mentioned before, I will be using this on the pieces where I use mixed media and I don't want my colored pencil and my Inktense to blend together. And then the rubbing alcohol, that's probably my third place because it is convenient, it's here, it's cheap, you can use it anytime, and it's going to be more archival than other things that are not made for art products. However, again, it does have an odor, and I am somebody who is sensitive to odor, so that's one reason why I don't use rubbing alcohol consistently. Okay, so that was a doozy of a video. I'm going to have a heck of a time editing it because there was a lot of blabbering. I think I covered everything. I hope that you found this helpful. I found it helpful for what I'm going to be doing from now on. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You have a great day. I will see you next week. Bye.
If you liked this video, check out this one next.